What if the first day of the year isn't about starting something new, but about finally seeing what you've been ignoring all along? The hush of the night before still rests in your hands, not like a pause between chapters, but like the very breath of who you are. While the streets sparkle with promises, your heart seems to move to a different rhythm, closer to what has gone unseen until now. Ask yourself, what are you really searching for on the first day of the year, when the lights turn on and your steps fall into the same familiar pattern? Maybe the answer isn't in a planner or in a calendar that simply flips its numbers. Maybe it's in the quiet distance between acting and feeling, between doing and noticing. The illusion of an external, fresh start shines like a bright mirror, beautiful, convincing, promising rebirth just because the date changes. But the calendar can turn, the year can begin, and still your awareness can remain almost invisible, like a room where the light never switches on or off, just waiting. Inside you, there's a subtle repetition of old habits, goals that look like lamps, plans that look like bridges, efforts that look like stairways. And behind that screen of projections, there's an invisible fatigue, born not from a lack of desire, but from a lack of clear direction. Have you ever looked at your resolutions and felt that energy isn't just strength, but the ability to see what's worth your strength? That the real beginning isn't a line you cross, but a recognition you make about what's already happening within you, right here, right now. Jesus enters this contemplation not as an institution, but as a teacher of awareness, not as a symbol that locks you into ritual, but as the example of someone who taught people to see before they act. He didn't begin with external change, rearranging schedules, stacking habits, optimizing routines. He began with inner transformation, an awakening that doesn't depend on any date, but on the clarity that rises when the mind meets a silence it can finally recognize. In his teachings, there's a quiet insistence: see before you act, or you may move without direction. Like someone running in circles inside a house with no doors. Jesus doesn't call you to more performance. He calls you to a kind of sight that turns ordinary moments into doorways of understanding. This video isn't about doing more, it's about understanding where everything begins. The noise of the world can shove us into haste, comparison and self-pressure, but when silence settles in, a question surfaces that can't be postponed. Where does your light come from? If you listen to what hasn't been said yet, you'll realize the first day of the year is an invitation to return to the inner space where everything begins, before any action. And in that space, a promise begins to unfold. The light many people treat as the reward of external effort doesn't start with discipline. It starts with the awareness of the heart. This isn't about feel-good lists or 365-day transformations, packaged like predictable miracles. It's about the kind of contemplation that dissolves the illusion of separation between you and the world, between you and the present. Silence isn't empty. It's fertile ground where light can take root. When you calm your mind enough to hear what isn't being shouted, you begin to notice that real direction isn't found in the next box you check off, but in who you are when there's no noise to manage and no deadlines squeezing your breath. Throughout this story, you'll be invited into a question older than any calendar. Where does your light truly begin? Not outside, not later, but in the deepest part of you, where perception becomes the map and the map becomes perception. And what if what Jesus reveals isn't some distant secret, but a simple and profound reminder? Your light begins where awareness stops armoring itself with the ego's need to control everything and starts listening to what's actually happening inside you. This is where the journey begins, not with the clock marking time, but with the moment you choose to hear what has always been present, even while everything around you tried to distract you. Notice what the first day of the year awakens in so many hearts. The chase for goals that promise redemption, discipline rising like a wall against chaos, willpower sharpening like a blade to cut down old patterns. It's almost a sacred ritual. This burst of January enthusiasm, as if flipping the page could erase last year's shadows. But ask yourself, why does this cycle repeat with such painful precision, year after year? The initial surge, bright with promises, soon gives way to quiet erosion, to quitting that isn't weakness, but the echo of something deeper that was never seen. Have you felt that in yourself? The moment your energy fades, not because you didn't try hard enough, but because you were moving without a true direction. This human pattern reveals an ancient philosophical illusion, confusing movement with direction. We run, produce, tweak our routines, believing the number of steps will bring us somewhere. But without the compass of awareness, effort only creates exhaustion, fatigue that settles like dust in a room without windows. Picture a traveler crossing deserts with detailed maps, yet blind to the horizon, shifting with every step. That's us at the start of a new year, moving with intensity, while missing that the real journey isn't measured in miles, but in the clarity with which we see the ground beneath our feet. Willpower, however noble, becomes a prison when it isn't rooted in inner vision. It holds up mechanical actions, repetitions that disguise the absence of a deeper foundation. And here is the spiritual connection Jesus emphasized. Light does not sustain actions born from unconsciousness. He warned with a simplicity that cuts straight through. They have eyes, but they do not see. It wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation to notice an invisible error, acting without the perception that first illuminates the inside. Think of the changes we swear we'll make. The diet that lasts a few weeks then collapses. The workout routine that starts with passion and ends in silence. The relationships we try to repair with more time or more words without ever asking what's really pulsing underneath. These attempts fail, not because we lack discipline, but because they're born from external pressure, from what the world approves, rather than from the clear voice of what the heart recognizes as true. You've felt that, haven't you? The weight of choices made on autopilot, guided by approval, not authenticity. Consider the everyday example of someone who vows to read more, buys a stack of inspiring books, and abandons them by February. It isn't laziness. It's the truth that external knowledge doesn't bloom without the fertile soil of inner curiosity, or the promise to be more patient, deep breaths, measured words, until the old reaction erupts again, revealing that surface change never touched the root. Jesus saw this clearly. Religious leaders who fasted and prayed with strict external discipline while their hearts remained closed. He didn't condemn effort. He revealed that without vision, it becomes futile, a permanent cycle of motivation and disappointment. And what if that invisible error is what keeps us trapped year after year, not in failure, but in the illusion of a beginning that never reaches the essential? That annual repetition isn't random. It's the symptom of a mind that prioritizes the visible over the invisible. Goals become temporary idols. Discipline becomes armor that weighs more than it protects. Willpower becomes a fire that burns fast without the oxygen of awareness. Ancient thinkers echoed this. Motion without soul is like wind shaking leaves without ever changing the tree. Spiritually, Jesus illustrated it with simple images, the sower scattering seeds onto rocky ground. They sprout quickly but cannot endure. That's what many resolutions are. They bloom in the thrill of a new date, then wither because the soil of awareness was ignored. You've lived this in work too, chasing achievements that end in emptiness, or in friendships maintained out of obligation instead of shared vision. Now consider the cost of that error, a life layered with subtle disappointment, where fatigue doesn't come from doing, but from doing without seeing. People rush to gyms, productivity apps, quick-fix retreats, searching for light outside, and then returned to the same place because the cycle was never broken at its origin. Jesus never prescribed more action. He invited people to pause, to see the pattern beneath behavior. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and ignore the plank in your own? Not as judgment, but as a mirror. We focus on the surface before facing the essential. That's the cycle. Enthusiasm that blinds, effort that drains, quitting that turns into self-blame. But what if there's a way out? Before right action, there is a right inner state. Not a technique, but an awareness that aligns movement with truth. The problem isn't wanting to change, it's starting in the wrong place, mistaking the noise of ambition for the whisper of light. Jesus didn't avoid the world, he transformed it because he saw beyond appearances, and he calls us to do the same. Feel the fatigue of this repetition in your own chest. How many broken promises weren't failures of will, but failures of sight? The world applauds visible effort, but the soul craves direction, born in conscious silence. And that brings us to a threshold. Noticing the error is the first step, but what comes before it? Jesus didn't fight patterns with more patterns. He withdrew into silence, preparing the ground for something deeper. It's in that silence that the cycle breaks, not by force, but by the clarity that rises when we stop running long enough to listen. Picture Jesus not in the center of crowds, but in the moments he stepped away, to quiet hillsides, to nights under a sky full of stars, to places that offered nothing but himself. He chose silence not as escape, but as the most fertile ground for what would come next. Before he healed, taught, fed the hungry, or calmed storms, there was that deep pause, not empty, but full of potential. What if the silence he sought wasn't the absence of sound, but the space where your inner voice finally speaks without interference? In those retreats, he wasn't drafting strategies. He was aligning with something greater, letting light reveal itself before any word or gesture. Silence, in this sense, is a philosophical necessity. Mental noise is the greatest barrier to the light we claim to want. A busy mind, thoughts rushing like turbulent water, can't perceive the essential because it's always projecting the next step, the next year, the next version of itself. Think about New Year's morning, when the world explodes with loud resolutions, mental lists buzzing like restless bees, distractions filling every corner of inner quiet. Jesus understood. Without space, perception dissolves into empty echoes. Ancient wisdom would say, silence is the mirror of the soul. If the mirror is shaken by urgency, nothing reflects clearly. Have you felt this at New Year's parties, surrounded by noise, yet your heart longing for something the crowd can't deliver? Silence isn't passivity. It's an active choice to let what matters rise, like clear water emerging after the ground settles. Spiritually, the first day of the year can feel like an inner desert, not a place of punishment, but the exact terrain where revelation is born. Jesus entered the desert not to be crushed, but to be strengthened in vision. Without crowds, expectations, or the weight of other people's opinions, he faced what mattered most, the temptation to skip silence and act from impulse. The inner desert of a new year is the same invitation. Cross what feels empty, where old illusions evaporate like mirages under the sun of honesty. There, distractions can't mask truth. There is only you, the pulse of your heart, and the quiet that asks ancient questions. What if that desert isn't punishment, but the womb where light forms, far from the world's applause for noise? Let this guide you inward. Imagine beginning the year without the rush the world imposes, without the clock dictating your awakening. Close your eyes for a moment and feel your body settle, your breath lengthen, your thoughts soften like leaves falling into a calm lake. In a space with no agenda and no forced promises, true listening begins, not with your ears, but with your whole being. Jesus pointed to this again and again. The kingdom of God is within you. not in loud rituals or external display, but in the quiet where consciousness expands. You've tasted this, maybe on an early morning walk, when the world felt still and something inside you lit up without effort. That is where the beginning becomes real, rooted in listening that comes before running, in presence that dissolves the anxiety of the future. Look deeper at Jesus' pattern. He withdrew after days of teaching, not from exhaustion, but from the need to realign. Silence was his fertile refuge, where the ego's voices, the same voices that push us toward empty goals, quieted enough for truth to flow. The Stoics echoed this in their morning reflection, but Jesus lived it as spiritual essence. Silence is not the end, it's the prelude to seeing. On the first day of the year, he calls you to do the same, to turn midnight celebration into a doorway to inner stillness, where last year's fatigue isn't fought with more action, but dissolved in quiet clarity. Feel the contrast. The world shouts, "Reinvent yourself now," while silence whispers, "See yourself first." This pause isn't a luxury. It's the root of lasting change. Think of the nights when, after the excitement ends, you lie down with an unexplainable emptiness. That isn't the party fading. It's the call to the inner desert. Jesus moved through that space with mastery, returning not with rigid plans, but with a clarity that could move mountains. Mental noise keeps us on the surface, worries about expectations, comparisons that dim our light, ambition that disguises fear. In silence, those layers fall away, and what remains is pure perception, the soil where true seeds can grow. What if the first day were devoted to this, not to lists, but to listening that turns the ordinary into something sacred? Go even deeper. Jesus' silence was contagious. People followed him not just for his words, but for the steadiness of someone who had been alone with the Father. He taught that God speaks in a whisper, not in thunder, a lesson for every beginning. In the inner desert of the new year, try this. Breathe slowly. Watch your thoughts pass like clouds without grabbing them. In that space, free from the tyranny of productivity, another kind of vision appears. A seeing that doesn't judge but understands, that doesn't force but allows. Many resist this because they fear emptiness, but what they find is fullness, the place where unnamed light begins to pulse. Silence prepares the ground the way no external effort can. It quiets the noise that blinds you to what matters, creating a holy openness where truth can settle. Jesus returned from those retreats changed, ready, because he had listened beyond appearances. Let your first day be like that, not a desert of suffering, but a desert of revelation where hurry yields to presence. But silence isn't where the light is born, it only prepares the ground. And what Jesus reveals next will completely change how you begin any year. Now we arrive at the heart of this journey, where silence opens not as an ending, but as a doorway to what Jesus reserved for those willing to listen beyond the visible. Light doesn't begin with the discipline you impose on yourself, or with behavior change you force through external rigidity. It doesn't rise from the visible effort of resolutions scribbled at midnight. It begins with the awareness of the heart, the intimate center where perception wakes up and shines on what has always been there. Ask yourself, what if the real beginning of the year isn't an act of willpower, but an act of sight, where the heart recognizes what the restless mind keeps missing? Jesus pointed directly to this, with a clarity that cuts through illusion like a beam of light. In Jesus' teaching, the symbols are unmistakable. The kingdom of God is within you, not in external kingdoms or future promises, but in the living center where awareness expands. And also, the lamp of the body is the eye. Not the physical eye scanning the world for change, but the eye of the soul, seeing from the inside out. In this spiritual and philosophical sense, seeing is the first awakening. Light begins when you recognize your own shadow, when you stop escaping the depth of yourself and face what is real without masks. Jesus didn't offer light as a reward for correct behavior. He revealed that light appears the moment awareness turns toward the heart and illuminates patterns that once slipped past you. Here is the mystery in one sentence. Your light begins the moment you stop running from yourself. This isn't warfare against flaws or forced self-improvement. It's a calm, honest embrace of what is, fears that whisper, desires that hide, cycles that repeat because they were never noticed. Seeing patterns is more transformative than fighting them, because vision dissolves the illusion that you are separate from what you seek to become. Jesus lived this before any miracle. There was the gaze that saw into a person's essence, not only their visible pain, but the latent light in their heart. That is how your year begins, turning inward, letting the heart's awareness become the source, guiding actions that flow naturally without the heavy burden of willpower. This revelation changes everything because it shifts the center of gravity from the external to the internal. The conscious heart doesn't draft victories, it simply sees, and that seeing produces aligned movement, like a river finding its course without needing a map. Jesus, the master of perception, taught through parables, light is not earned, it is recognized. On the first day of the year, that recognition makes the ordinary sacred. The heartbeat reveals directions no planner could ever predict. And that is exactly why the modern world resists this light, not because it's weak, but because it exposes what keeps the machine running. Our systems, busy calendars, endless notifications, a culture that worships productivity, treat the awareness of the heart as a threat because it unmasks the illusions that prop up movement without meaning. Ask yourself, why does inner stillness feel so uncomfortable in an age that calls noise progress? Jesus wasn't rejected because his light was distant. He was resisted because it illuminated collective shadows and revealed that what many call a full life is often distraction dressed up as urgency. Jesus faced this everywhere. Crowds came for the multiplied loaves, not the vision that would change their hearts. The powerful feared him not because of his love, but because of the truth that stripped hypocrisy bare. Awareness threatens autopilot because it invites people to pause, to see beyond appearances, to question what the world sells as essential. On the first day of the year, that resistance shows up as social pressure, pushing you toward visible goals while ignoring the heart's quiet call to alignment. Let this validate you. If you feel out of place in the constant rush, it isn't a flaw in you. It may be a sign that perception is waking up. Light reveals, disrupts, transforms, and that's why beginning the year from it changes simple decisions and reshapes an entire destiny. Beginning the year from this light doesn't mean drawing rigid roadmaps or forcing yourself into perfection. It means adopting an inner posture that separates automatic reaction from conscious response. Imagine a January morning, not as a battlefield against old habits, but as a calm mirror where the heart's awareness reflects what truly matters and guides the day without resistance. Jesus lived like this. His actions flowed from inner vision, not from reacting to external chaos. A steadiness that made ordinary moments profound without strain. Ask yourself, what if your first step was simply seeing the present clearly, letting your response rise like a river finding the ocean? In decision-making, this light reveals paths a frantic mind can't access. When you face a career choice that shines with status, pause and listen, not to fear of falling behind, but to the quiet voice that knows whether it nourishes your spirit or only fills your calendar. Relationships shift the same way. Instead of trying to fix conflict with more words or surface-level compromises, conscious vision notices the pattern beneath what's said and unsaid. Tension dissolves not because you tried harder to be better, but because you finally saw what was true. Less effort follows, not from apathy, but from alignment. Actions begin to flow like fruit from a tree with deep roots. This is the way of Jesus. He didn't react to provocation with defensive performance. He responded from a consciousness that saw beyond the moment, turning ordinary encounters into openings for awakening. In the new year, this shows up in simple scenes, a conversation where real listening reveals shared vulnerability, a daily routine that changes not by force, but because you can finally see what truly energizes you. Right action is born from right seeing, the way sunlight moves a flower without a command, and in the end, the year doesn't begin outside you, in glowing streets or a new calendar. It begins the moment your awareness turns toward the present with a clarity that dissolves the illusion of a distant future. Light doesn't arrive from the horizon, it rises here and now, when you let the heart see what has always been there in silence. Jesus embodied this. Time is not an enemy, but a servant when lived in eternal presence, where beginnings and endings dissolve into one continuous now. Feel it in your breath. The whole year is contained in this moment, not in goals that drift like smoke. Jesus didn't call people into crowded performances. He called them awake, not to layer effort on top of effort, but to see who they've always been, a light waiting only to be recognized. On the first day, his whisper reaches across time. Stop searching outside for what your heart already holds. Wake up to the perception that turns the ordinary into sacred. This isn't about dramatic reinvention. It's a simple turning inward, where the world's fatigue dissolves in quiet purpose. So what if this year isn't about becoming someone better? What if it's about finally seeing the light that was already there, waiting for your eyes to notice? Let that question stay with you in the silence. Walk forward not like someone chasing shadows, but like someone following an inner flame that lights each step. If this journey awakened something in you, take a deep breath, reflect on where your light begins, and share what silence revealed to you today. Subscribe for more reflections that wake up what matters. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next invitation to awareness, and like this video if you felt the call. May this be the year of true seeing.